So just quick before we start. So for those who are not familiar with the BCCC, for 47 years, we've been building relationships between Brazil and Canada, strengthening the bilateral relationships in investment, trade, best practices, and mutual growth and prosperity. Our relationships are private and public, featuring the managing directors and decision makers from companies and institutions of all sizes, and our volunteer board of directors that expertise, knowledge, and connections that can only be found by being active players in the Brazil-Canada market. We're a membership-based organization, so we support our members through information networking. So if you want to learn more about the BCCC and how it can help your company, please do not hesitate to contact us. I'm really excited about the program we put together for you today. So without further ado, we'll start with our opening remarks. I would like to invite Dr. Daniela Chimisso, Senior Advisor in Governance at Proactiva, to say a few words. Dani, mic with you.
First of all, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Carolina, and thank you so much for the BCC to have hosting such a spectacular event and such a timely event in these times. As Carolina mentioned, I am Senior Advisor of Proactiva. Proactiva is a boutique consulting firm focused on sustainability. We operate across Latin America, Canada, and other emerging markets, specifically in Sub-Saharan Africa. Our main areas are sustainability, ESG, business and human rights, and sustainable finance. Ultimately, ESG is our core business. We are living through unprecedented times. The Financial Times has pointed out that we are in the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. Just yesterday, the UK has put out information saying that their output has not been this bad in 300 years. As we live through the second wave of the global pandemic and continued lockdowns occur throughout the world, how we rebuild is the question of the day, and how we tackle climate change and crippling inequality is the question that we must all look into. As we look into the mantras of Build Back Better, the green recovery, a sustainable recovery, what we're actually looking at is a real step change that needs to occur from what were past practices and what the future will actually look like. A reevaluation of the role of market players is underway, and as we discuss, a movement from a system-based and shareholder supremacy to a more inclusive order of stakeholder capitalism, the tools we use for that change are critical. And the environmental social governance agenda has taken the lead on how economic players embark on the change originated. First of all, if we look at the environmental, the ESG agenda has evolved from a number of principles, specifically from social responsible investment, from corporate social responsibility, from the tripod of sustainable development, and it's been coupled with the acknowledged governance gaps that aims to ensure accountability and gain transparency. As we look around, the ESG agenda is pretty much everywhere. Just as a note, I returned to Brazil after many years in Canada in August last year. And by January, we were discussing the ESG agenda, and many of my colleagues in law firms, in corporations, thought that the ESG agenda was not something that Brazil was actually ready for. And in the past 8 months, what we have seen is an absolute tsunami of ESG taking over the Brazilian market. It is not, of course, only in Brazil, but as we've seen, it's throughout the world. Just yesterday, the CEO of 8 leading Canadian pension plan investment managers, representing approximately 1.6 trillion in assets under management, have called on companies and investors to help drive sustainable and inclusive economic growth through the ESG agenda. The question then turns to, how do we measure specifically what is being done within the ESG, within the ESG world? What are companies specifically doing? What is changing? What are the actual facts that we can point to, that we can demonstrate that this change in a business framework is actually undertaking? And it is exactly this question that this panel will look at today. The point here is not to look at ESG in a theoretical perspective or how it fits into a broader discussion of this change that we are seeing in the way that the market works. But our intent is to look at the pragmatic changes that these organizations are actually seeing within their own groups. Our intent is to look at, first of all, what have we actually done in 2020 that has increased or developed in our practice, that has generated an upgrade on how ESG is being managed in our own organizations? And secondly, as we look forward to 2021, what are the major challenges that these organizations will face within the ESG agenda? It is with great pleasure and real delight that we are participating in these conversations. It is only through a specific and clear key changes that we can actually be able to begin a green recovery and to build back better. It is with such pleasure that I return back the word to Carolina, and I look forward to hearing and listening more about this panel. Thank you, Carolina.
Thank you, Daniela, for the great introduction into the subject and to lead the discussion and how players are in companies, financial institutions, consultants have completely stepped up their ESG practices. I'd like to ask Rafael Benke, CEO of Proactiva, to join us together with our panel of experts. We have here today Arthur Liacre, VP Public Affairs, Sustainability, Strategy and Business Development, Brazil at the Mosaic Company, Alex Monteiro, Corporate Finance Executive Manager at Neoenergia, Felipe Guardiano, VP Sustainability and Strategic Planning at Nexa Resources, Tom Eveson, Director of Sustainable Finance Solutions at Sustainalytics, Bruce Keith, Senior Investment Officer, Latin America for Climate Finance at IFC-World Bank, and Michael Torrance, Chief Sustainability Officer at BMO. Rafa, I'll pass the mic to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolina. Well, thank you. Well, thanks to the BCCC for another amazing initiative. Carolina, for all your drive. Frederico, Marques, for all your leadership across these years in topics and themes like this one that we are approaching. Thanks to all of you who have joined us, and special thanks to these panelists. I think as Daniela put very well in her opening remarks, that I think set a fantastic stage for our discussions. We really want to bring the pragmatic view about ESG. I think we've seen different panels, and we've been with some of these panelists in other events. But this one, we really wanted to bring the practitioners' angle. I think these, beyond the organizations that they represent, as Carolina very well introduced, these are people who haven't been parachuted into this topic yesterday. So they've been around, they've been working in their fields for literally decades. I think Arthur Liacre, who I've known for a long time, has a long time been in contact with natural resources, agriculture, infrastructure sectors from a standpoint of social, environmental governance, risk. Tom, with his experience in capital markets, in sustainable finance, in impact investment. Alex Monteiro, with his experience in M&A, in due diligence of companies, in understanding risks of these companies that were under M&A, all his finance experience and international experience from this standpoint. Felipe Guardiano, the same, a long-time practitioner in mining, natural resources, in planning, in performance. Bruce, also with a long-time experience designing, executing international business and economic development initiatives. Michael, a long time also at finance. And again, our Cescon Barrieu colleagues who have joined us in the inspiration of this event, in bringing a very pragmatic event regarding ESG, and namely Marques and Frederico, who have in their firm a long time experience in social, environmental, and governance matters. So, well, everybody had experience in this, so nothing is new, or can we say so or not? I think a fundamental question that we've been asking ourselves is ESG more of the same, or do we have something new? And if we have something new, what are we concretely doing about it? And I think this is the question that Daniela posed, and this is the question posed to our panelists. What have we been doing throughout 2020 with all this wave and turmoil of discussions regarding ESG? What have we concretely been doing? And we've been seeing concrete moves by several players, as Daniela was saying. Just an example, if we take the regulatory front, we see the European Union, we see South Korea, Japan, all of them regulating for a 2050 neutrality in carbon. Just taking carbon as an example, China just announced its ambition for carbon neutrality by 2060. This is also being derived or stimulated by the financial segment, and we will hear that in the macro sense, but also in the specific sense of each institution. Not only banks thinking of their own operations, but thinking of the neutrality of their portfolios by certain dates. If I am thinking about neutrality of my portfolio by 2040, by 2050, I want to know what companies are doing, but not only doing, committing to know if I can or not keep certain companies in my portfolio, and if the plans that they have to reach these commitments are really viable, and if they really going to happen. So I think this is the type of discussions we are going to see, and this is not only for carbon. We are seeing this movement for biodiversity, for water, for gender, for human rights, and these commitments are not commitments just in a fluffy positive agenda, voluntary positive agenda, but instead what we are seeing is really firm commitments connected to metrics, connected to KPIs. And this shift that Daniela was talking about to a stakeholders perspective, to a rights holders perspective, is demanding accuracy. And I think this is the big change that can support our argument that ESG is not more of the same. Of course, it's a lot of what we've been doing, but we have developed tools, quality, content that allow us more and more to bring this accuracy and bring this convergence in the discussions of different segments of stakeholders: capital, operators, rights holders, various stakeholders, civil society, consumers. So with this convergence approach, what have we, each of us here in this panel, been doing? What have we transformed, stepped up this year so that we can illustrate what we've been doing concretely in order to better address this agenda with yet more content. So with this introduction, I would like to shift now to our panelists. I think we can kick off with Arthur Liacre, bringing his first perspectives, and then we'll move on to the other panelists. Please, Arthur, you have the floor.
Thank you, Rafael. First in line. First of all, I'd like to thank you again for the kind invitation to this discussion. It's really a pleasure. Thank the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce and Carolina as well, and say hello to my colleagues here on the panel. Very nice introduction, Rafael. I think you covered a lot of the points that, from a Mosaic perspective, we've been detecting on the ground. My speech would really be about a practical case study that we've been through in Brazil, and to make it clear, and sort of front load the message. It's about setting up our governance around ESG in a newly formed business in Brazil that resulted from an acquisition we finalized about 3 years ago. And so this is really what we have been busy doing here in Brazil at Mosaic. A quick step back. Mosaic is a global fertilizer company. We're a Fortune 500 company. We're publicly traded in the New York Stock Exchange. We have about 12,000 people working globally, half of which are in Brazil. We originate our products mainly in Canada for potash, where we mine potash. We have phosphates operations in Florida. And last but not least, Mosaic took a defining step in Brazil about 3 years ago by finalizing the acquisition of the assets and fertilizer from Vale. And so the company became much bigger from maybe people, it grew to about 10,000. And we are a vertically integrated player now in Brazil, operating 6 mines and transforming and distributing our products in about 10 states. So the footprint of our company has grown massively. And I think that became I would say, the foundation for us to think about what we wanted to do in the sustainability and now the ESG space in Brazil. If you're in mining and agriculture in Brazil, there's no way you can run your business with having a clear ESG value proposition that you develop and explain to the not only to the internal audience you have, but to the external audiences and all the stakeholders that you need to relate to. And the nice part of that, I would say, that starting platform is that newly configured business in Brazil started when the ESG concept was starting to gain momentum in Brazil, and it has only grown since then. And it was covered in the introductory remarks. There's no way you can read the press today and talk to different people in the private sectors without having to exchange on what people do in the ESG space. So that said, with a clear necessity identified, a clear aspiration to build our value proposition in the ESG space, I put into parentheses the fact that Mosaic has always had a very clear agenda on sustainability. But coming back to ESG, we were absolutely resolute in building our strategy around that. So we had to analyze a few dimensions. So first was around how do we want to do it? What's the mentality we want to apply to that? Because when you form a new company, you have legacy companies that probably did things in a different way, had different cultures, and we were going through that cultural integration process of forming Mosaic Fertilizantes in Brazil. But the true dimensions that we wanted to, I would say, to retain was, being practical about it, being agile, but also, using the right concepts and applying the right concepts to our strategy. The second thing was to think about, the direction. You have an aspiration, which is to build your value proposition. What's the direction you want to take? And one of the early conclusions we had was to say, we can't just develop ESG for the sake of developing a nice, branding program around that. We need to install it as a business process in the organization, basically. So it needs to be embedded in the business, and I'll explain a little bit more how we did that. And the third thing was to talk about, how fast we want to go. What's the speed of that? And although Mosaic is a company that has, a decent amount of agility, we said, wherever we will need to go slow to go fast, we will do it. In the end, we went relatively fast, as I will explain, but I think it was, one of the drivers we used to think through a few key dimensions. And then we followed on with, I would guess, a few steps, very practical steps, which were, first, baselining and benchmarking. And what I mean by baselining, so you have, Mosaic acquiring the assets of Vale Fertilizantes in Brazil. The first thing we really wanted to understand back then was how sustainable the combined ensemble is, basically. Because just by doing your business, you have, very nice environmental conservation programs that are going on. You have, your program of relationships with the communities. You got your governance systems, And I think that the pleasant surprise was that, we actually found out that a lot was being done by both organizations. And if you sum that all up, basically, we had, a very nice starting point in terms of level of investment, sophistication of the process, and quality of the program. So that was one thing we did. The second thing was to benchmark, of course, and this is where we got a little bit more academic, I would say, and using, borrowing the right models out there. So understanding, where we felt our organization was sitting. If you use the Simon Zadig model, from defensive to civil, we were probably at the managerial level, and we had this, aspiration of becoming a bit more strategic. And of course, we use, the SAS materiality matrix to identify where we sat compared to some of our peers in the mining and the ag space. So that was some of the early work we did. We also took, very concrete steps in terms of linking our organization with the right ecosystem of associations and discussion forums that we thought were, extremely relevant to our agenda. So for example, Mosaic was not affiliated or not a member in Brazil of the Global Compact Network in Brazil. This was one of the first initiatives we took. We were not an affiliate organization to the Ethos Institute, which is a very meaningful organization in the sustainability and ESG space. So we started to, guarantee that we had a seat at the table, basically. And so we went through that process, and then we embarked into a very, bottom-up process, participatory, cross-functional, multidisciplinary process of revalidating our material issues. And that took maybe about 6 to 8 months to have certainty about, the focus areas that we needed to actually, position in our ESG agenda. And we ended up with 9 focus areas, each, having a supporting action plan, KPIs, metrics, and more importantly, a senior leader in the organization who was actually going to, who is helping us lead that process. And so we came out of that process with, our material issues nicely identified, a high level of certainty that these were, on spot for, what our business needed. And the last chapter of that journey was really to say, now that we have our material issues well identified, our actions plans, what do we do about it? And we decided as a last step to create an ESG committee for the Brazil business, Brazil-Paraguay more precisely, that where all these people who are leading our focus areas meet on a regular basis. So it's a monthly committee that we have installed in the business, where we dedicate 60 to 90 minutes per month to discussing how things are going in each of the topics that are considered as a priority. But most importantly, one of the key decisions we had to take was to say, what's the level of seniority we need to actually, insert in that committee. And so although I retained functional responsibility over ESG, I was, absolutely convinced with some of my colleagues that we needed to have our more senior leader chairing the committee. And so we have our CEO who chairs that committee. I sit on the steering committee, and I have other, fellow colleagues, VPs, who actually are sponsors of some of the key dimensions of our agenda. And this is how we are developing our governance and how we're actually managing our ESG agenda. A couple of last remarks. We had already 3 meetings. Fantastic way to actually put the spotlight on smaller initiatives that sit in as part of the action plans we have for our focus areas that would be very discrete in normal times or without the ESG lens. So the engineer who's doing some marginal investment to increase the efficiency from an energy, water, emissions perspective of his sulfuric or phosphoric plant at a particular location. These are things that typically you don't necessarily take the time to see as an ESG committee, but that surfaces in the discussions. And so we're made aware of what's happening. And then on top of that, we elected to have a number of flagship projects. I could comment on, for hours, but in the interest of time, I'll just cite a few, which is, working with, Embrapa to train some technicians on the, use of fertilizers for degraded pasture land, working with our Mosaic Institute on our, top community priorities around food, water, education, local development, working with our suppliers with a nice partnership with the ESOS Institute to guarantee that, they themselves see sustainability and ESG in the same way we see it, and guarantee alignment, at least conceptually, and in some of the practices they have. Diversity and inclusion, where we have clear objectives. So all these projects are attached to one of our focus areas, and we review that on a regular basis, on a monthly basis, with the senior leadership of this organization. Last but not least, I'd like to mention that this year was very specific, as everyone knows, with an unprecedented sanitary crisis. So if we look at ESG, we also spent in parallel a fair amount of time on the S aspect of ESG, helping our communities on sanitary, health, and food relief wherever needed. But that was something that was done in parallel to whatever I have described here. So this is my first remarks, Rafael.
Arthur, thank you so much. Really astonishing what you've managed to accomplish in 2020, despite this overwhelming demand brought by the pandemic. So really congratulations. Extremely interesting how you put it, where it started, the whole process you followed through, and what you achieved. I think certainly we'll see some crossing of what you're doing with other panelists. Let me shift to Alex so that he brings some examples of what they've been doing in 2020, and then we'll move on to the others. Alex?
Good morning, Rafael. Thank you very much. Thank you for your introduction. I would like to thank the BCCC as well for bringing up such a relevant theme for all of us. And it was good to hear Daniela as well. And the questions are quite relevant. And the question you brought is quite relevant. Is it about something new that ESG will bring to the organizations and will bring us to a new level? Or it's just about the same? And definitely it's quite new. And I will go back in time when we first, in 2019, and it's good to see how we have, in a way, increased, and I would consider in a fast way, our focus on that theme. Back in 2019, we issued in Brazil our first green bond, or our first green debenture. At that time, it was the largest issued in Brazil, the largest green debenture in Brazil, 1.3 billion. And at that time, when we see the stats of Brazil, you would see that worldwide, following CBI's stats, you would see that the world would have issued $260 billion of green bonds, while Brazil was with $5 billion only. And that was witnessing that, well, our objective was quite accomplished. We were kind of differentiating ourselves in a time where there was a lot of issuances in Brazil. But by the other hand, this was a way to see that we were still lagging the DC in Brazil. And the comments that kind of illustrates the roadshow that we were going through was really interesting. One of the managers of one asset, when we were introducing and explaining that it was a green debenture, he said, well, that's good. I have a lady in my portfolio that she will like it because she likes those stuff. So that you see that. So looking back to
Alex,
you're a bit more year ago,
with your connection, you're breaking a lot. Maybe you take off your video to see if it works better, or we shift to the next panelist, and then we come back to you if you reconnect.
Yeah, let's see if it improves. Let me see if I can change the connection here and if it will improve. Let me know if it's going any better or not.
Yes, we can hear you. You want to try and go forward and then we see.
Yeah, let's try once more if the connection is improved or not. Is it better now, Benke?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll go back a bit, and I was just talking about our experience of issuing a green bond in Brazil. So back in 2019, we had an experience. We saw that the Brazilian market, capital markets, was quite initiating and not very aware, or even I would say engaged and motivated, even from an investor's perspective. And I was giving an example of one manager of one asset while we were in the roadshow, saying that when we were introducing and saying that we were issuing a green bonds and explaining why it was green and all the process we've been through. Then his comment was, well, I have one senior lady in my portfolio and she might be interested in that. So this was kind of illustrating how it was not a year ago. And what we see in that market right now, it's quite a big shift. I would like briefly to step back and talk a bit about the organization, but it was important to give that example. But we are in an organization that we could say that has a DNA of an ESG DNA. We are, Neoenergia is the second largest utility or power company in Brazil. From a distribution perspective, of power distribution, we are present in all segments of the electric sector. We are controlled by Iberdrola, and Iberdrola, just to give you a notion of that DNA, Iberdrola is one of the largest utility companies worldwide. It has 70 billion euros market cap currently, around that, and it is a company that 20 years ago decided really to face that challenge, and it was kind of pioneering. So to give you a notion of the metrics of Iberdrola, Iberdrola has multiplied by 4 its capacity of renewable generation, has reduced by 70% its emissions, has completely banished any generation of power out of oil and coal from its portfolio, from 100% eliminated. So being in an organization like that, it of course helps. But by the other hand, that DNA and thinking about the market in Brazil was something that would support us. But when we thought about the challenge after that issuance in 2019 that we had in Brazil, and recently with all the talks we've seen and all the situation and reputation that is somehow being built about our country, we thought that, and that's where we started to act, to say that, well, we have to position ourselves, to better position ourselves to compete for capital. The way we are right now, we won't be able to compete for capital because you see all that the European market is doing in regards to sustainable finance, and we were really lagging behind. So we took a decision as a company, not only to, I would say that the 2019 issuance was a project, and that is the first step. The 2019 issuance was a project. Then we said that, well, we need to make that really a program and something that will be in the DNA of our organization, and our financial approach to the market has to be that way. So we stepped back and analyzed what we would need to do in order to really start that, and what was kind of bringing us to do that, to start that discussion of ESG in the market, and even with counterparties such as BNDES, BNB, which are institutions that are supporting us heavily. We are investing, just to give you a notion, we are investing 30 billion reais in Brazil in the next 4-5 years. So we really are supported by those institutions, and that's all about infrastructure. So we said that, well, we need to first understand what the market is doing and kind of try to bring to our organization that the importance of us positioning ourselves and making that more than only green issuances, but transforming that in something that is embedded in all the organization, in the whole organization. So what we have done, first, we have started and decided to structure a framework, a green framework that is embedding all our investments. So we have done that, and in that process, we have been in contact with key investors in Brazil, and that is good to see that the progress from 2019 to now is huge. Although we are still lagging behind if you compare ourselves to Europe, but when we think about the market and how the investors are approaching that theme, the progress is huge. So you already have, for example, BNDES has just promoted what they call the Green Week, and talking about what they are doing towards that. They have just announced that they will finance, they are addressing 8.5 billion reais only to ESG projects. So that's really powerful. We take investors like JGP that are definitely embedding in their credit analysis an ESG perspective. We didn't exist up to some months ago. So you have the Bradesco Asset Management is doing the same. Banco do Brasil is doing the same. So we are, and we are having the opportunity to discuss with them, learn together, and understand we're all talking about metrics. And that's one key element of what we need to develop. Because there is one important perspective that we need to take into consideration. When we talk about ESG, the E piece of it is somehow working because you have, and in Brazil, we have a strong legislation when you talk about environment. The G piece in an organization like ours that is controlled by a big corporation, European corporation, and also by a pension fund in Brazil is also well developed. When you think about the S, there is no legislation. And when you see situations as the one we have seen in the press recently, we see that, well, that's a challenge we have. So what we have done since then, we have really realized that we need metrics. We need to have clear goals. And even if we have good initiatives, and I'll give you an example, we have created, thinking about the S piece and the diversity, we have created a school of electricians only for women. That is created. But then when you challenge ourselves about, and what's your goal with that? So the goal is not defined. So the initiatives are there. The goal, I mean, is your goal to have 20% of your workforce with women, and that is, or 50%, and by when you get that. So that's one challenge that we still have, but we have given the first step. I mean, we have created the school. So diversity is definitely in the agenda. We have also created a program that's called SER, that is addressing the 3 pillars of social development. So the pillar of the social pillar, the pillar of income to the people, the pillar of education, and the pillar of health. And those 3 pillars are embedded in the way we affect the communities where we are acting right now.
Alex,
the others,
thank you so much. Let us shift a little bit, and then I'll come back to you. I think you advanced a lot on examples and framing what you're doing, and I found interesting the link of what you are doing to what Mosaic is doing, the approach of embedding ESG into the business. And I think that's a very interesting feature that we are seeing across the board in more sophisticated players, and those who really mean doing that structurally, right? And you touch on another aspect that I like to provoke maybe Tom to step in and contribute, because you talk about metrics, and I think Sustainalytics has been dedicating decades to this, and has a long tradition in this, and I think they've been busier than ever from what I understand, right, Tom? And maybe you could bring some of your examples of what you saw stepping up in 2020, connecting already with what Arthur and Alex said.
Sure, thank you very much. I'll try and answer these quickly and directly because we definitely pulled up a lot of data coming into this. So completely agree. So just within, maybe just stepping back, it's worth noting to add into these trends for metrics. Sustainalytics started about 30 years ago to track and manage sustainability or ESG data. But the idea, the focus at the time was that the clientele were all going to be investors and that we would approach those investors and then offer to give, at the time, the acronym was SRI, Socially Responsible Investing, ratings for companies and portfolios. Fast forward here to 2020, and this sort of ties in as well to what are we doing in our organization. Over the last 3-4 years, corporations with the whole global movement have taken a much keener interest in their own ESG scores and their own sustainability footprint. So the team, my team and the team I'm on, our entire focus is dealing with corporations, helping them with their ESG ratings, with their bond issuance, with their impact and comparisons with other companies. So in Brazil, to note what the others have just mentioned, in Brazil, by far the most companies we have rated are in Brazil with 320, and the next country, obviously Mexico by population, would be just above half of that. So Brazil, my point on this presentation is Brazil is definitely leading in LATAM and frankly in North America than the United States. It's Brazil for us, and we've actually added people on our team from Brazil. So that's a very promising trend, and I'd almost suggest weekly more companies are interested in getting an ESG rating. In bond issuance in Brazil for thematic, so social or everything green, and in 2018 there were 4, and in 2020 so far there have almost been 30. So that is increasing. And then probably the biggest other thing we are seeing is more and more companies in Brazil are calling us saying, and they're not necessarily the Fortune 500 or the largest companies and the largest portfolios. You've got small, medium-sized private companies saying, if I want to be a supplier to Microsoft, I have to get an ESG rating. You've got auto manufacturers saying, if you're going to be a supplier to us, we want you to have an ESG rating, not necessarily from Sustainalytics, but ongoing. And I think the overall theme for everything driving this is transparency, transparency. None of us can escape it. I'm looking into your living room. You're looking into my kitchen. It's coming from an individual all the way up to corporate headquarters. And maybe and I'll end on just a couple points. The big trends we're seeing internally, we've been in this industry, it's the whole purpose of our company, but so it's more what's happening to us or how are we adapting to what's going on in the world. So I would say, so I've already mentioned, it's moving more towards corporations around the world saying we need to take control of our sustainability footprint. We're seeing, we were just acquired by Morningstar Sustainalytics, and that is happening globally. So that is something we all need to pay very close attention to. Financial data and financial ratings and financial analysis is merging with ESG analysis. They are no longer two things. ESG and sustainability used to be a nice to have, but it is quickly becoming mandatory, and you have regulation making that a must. But you also just have trends everywhere. For instance, we just announced for Morningstar, which gave financial ratings for companies. Now that's going to integrate all the Sustainalytics ESG ratings into those ratings. And that's happening, whether it's MSCI or in Europe, all the companies are gobbling each other up. And then maybe the other thing is, I also say a big thing that a big trend we're seeing is a shift from what started as just ratings is now moving to impact. And again, that's creeping into regulation, that's creeping into just what investors are asking. And then I think one of the neatest or most impactful things I saw was on November 29th, the Swiss parliament is going to vote as to whether or not to hold Swiss domiciled companies responsible for any malpractice in their supply chain. So that would be the first country I know to actually make it law that moves it from, again, it would be great if you have oversight because you don't want to get in trouble with your clients or your customers, to making it actual regulation. So that's happening. And maybe just in time, I'll pause there because we can talk more after, but those are the things we are seeing in Brazil. For us, is we definitely see it as the rising powerhouse in Sustainalytics. I mean, obviously, United States will be a huge driver in the market, but Brazil is a close second for sure. Thank you.
Great, Tom. That was a great picture that you brought from your standpoint. Let me shift to Felipe now to tell us a little bit what's going on with Nexa resources. Then I'll ask Michael Torrance to step in, and then we'll wrap up with Bruce before we go into more interconnections of what we've spoken about. So Felipe.
Can you hear me well?
Very well.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks BCCC for this great event. Thanks Proactiva. Interesting to have this talk with such illustrious panelists, and you yourself, Mr. Rafael Benke. We're glad to be here. Thanks for inviting us. Nexa, previously named Votorantim Metais, is a producer of zinc. It has mines and smelters, and it produces zinc concentrate, copper concentrate, and then it produces zinc metal from its metallurgical plants. We have operations here and in Peru, and we have been around for over 60 years. What I have to say, I'm not going to repeat, but it's similar to Mosaic, and it's similar to Neoenergia as well. We have been constantly developing at different paces our, let's say, sustainability practices and agenda over the decades. Of course, more recently, this pace has accelerated tremendously due to world constraints or world demand. And in particular, the last 2 or 3 years, we have seen this ESG phenomena coming up. So you asked in the beginning, is ESG something new? In a way, it is not, because it is sustainability practices again, and a continuation. What is new is, I think, is the world awareness for it, is how investors are quickly demanding it, how the market and the public at large and government and stakeholders, relevant stakeholders, are making a point, be it in social license to operate or in regulations in general, are becoming more and more stringent for companies. In particular, perhaps, or perhaps not, it's just that I'm in the mining sector, and we had aggravation in the last few years, like accidents like Samarco and Brumadinho, which I think accelerated a lot of the demand on responsibility, on actionable, requiring actionable initiatives from the sector to sort these accidents, or to sort this preventing accidents such as these from happening again. So I think, like it was said, the E part of the ESG, which is environment, I think we have been working for a long time, and I think we are evolving. The governance part, Nexa became public in 2017, and from a family-owned company to a public-owned company, it changes a lot. And we're listed in New York, we're listed in Toronto. So it had a big change in the company and how we do things. And also the governance part is inbuilt in there. And like Alex said, the social part is the thing that we have to move faster, I think. I think the social part is where we need to improve. And we perceive this need at Nexa, and we have been accelerating this at Nexa. Of course, mining companies have problems with residues and water, and because it uses a lot of water, and it has to keep recirculating even more, demanding the water even less. But so this has always been in our agenda, anyways. What is becoming more important and relevant is the social side, both in Brazil and in Peru. And it's not a patronizing relationship between the company and the community where we are located, but more of how much of our value, how much of this company value are we willing to share, and what is our strategy? Where do we want to put this value in, and how do we want to contribute, and how do we engage and invite the community to participate actively on it and co-create a legacy? So we are now at Nexa designing these thoughts and this strategy. Of course, we have, like other companies, we have material topics, material themes. We have 12 of them. We just reviewed them. We had about 8. We added 4 more, and for each one of those, we have groups working on it with KPI indicators, targets for pluriannual targets. But we're still continuously working with our board, with our committees, a sustainability committee that we have at Nexa. We are still working on where the mining of the future is. The sector of mining has been working in basically the same way for a long, long time. And I'm a mining engineer myself, and I came out of school in the 80s. This business looked like very much what we did 2,000 years ago, but now with bigger machines and in a bigger scale. But the mining business seemed to be the last one to perceive that talent makes a difference. So the mining business is a little conservative, it follows the pack. And now the sector is the same. The mining business need to take a stand, and the mining business is not going to disappear. Mining companies will, however, and those that will stay are the ones that perceive the different role that they have within all this ecosystem within the world. How can we effectively contribute in a different way? And we're at Nexa, I think we realize that, and we're trying to design or understand and put in our strategic plan this new format. We're doing great progress in it. So I think I'll stop for now.
That's great, Felipe. And I think especially this last part of what you're bringing forward, really highlighting the strategic dimension, the essence of thinking of how to embed not only in the operational side and practices, but also in the very strategic thinking of where the business is heading. And I think that connects a lot with that Alex was illustrating from Neoenergia and the Iberdrola, the transformation that Iberdrola went through in the core business, right? And I think from Nexa we've been seeing a lot of the signals and your connection with innovation of breaking barriers, going beyond in the essence of what you're thinking. So that's very interesting, something that we can explore further. Let me shift to Michael. We've been in other panels with BMO before, and BMO has been very involved in these discussions. And it would be great to hear your insights, Michael.
My pleasure, and thank you, Rafael, for inviting me and for BCCC for organizing this session. I visited Brazil about 20 years ago, and I was a student at the time and had taken a course learning all about the history and culture and industry in Brazil. And there's so many great opportunities for connection between Brazil and Canada. So I really appreciate the work that you do to build those bridges and hold a session like this. And I've been really fascinated to hear my fellow panelists talk about their experiences and hear how similar the words that are being used, the experiences that people have had, which kind of reinforces what my theme of discussion was going to be, was really around an idea of convergence. And it was a word that you used, Rafael, in your introductory remarks, because I think there really is a convergence around certain types of concepts, I think a unified desire to try to find more standardized ways of thinking about ESG. One of the most significant developments that I saw in 2020 was around resilience and climate change, and the rise of regulators and actors that in the past had really been silent on these topics, converging around certain ideas that have had a huge impact on our own sustainability strategy. If I step back to talk about kind of the context, in 2019, there was a lot of discussion around climate. There were certain standards like the Financial Stability Board's Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure that had set out frameworks for both disclosure and also had put out aspirational concepts around scenario analysis and how to actually analyze risk related to climate change. But even at just a year ago, over a year ago, there wasn't really a lot of I would say clear engagement by companies or an understanding or appreciation of what it would entail. But over the last 2 years, and particularly this year, there's been a lot of work done, and we have done a lot of work around building actual methodologies to embed climate risk into broader risk frameworks. And it's been quite fascinating to watch, because the premise of all of it, and others have touched upon this already, is the idea that financial markets perhaps are not actually adequately integrating these kinds of topics, and that going forward, that integration will become a necessity. There was a McKinsey report that was released earlier this year. It kind of got overshadowed later by everything around COVID, and I think climate change got overshadowed by COVID, but there's a nexus between the two around this idea of resilience. But this McKinsey report, which inspired some comments from Larry Fink at BlackRock and others, talked about how latent climate risk can create potential market distortions. For example, if we're not properly pricing in the physical hazards that could be emerging from climate risk, be they flooding or fire, when those things happen and they haven't been adequately priced, it can result in rapid repricing of assets. And so real estate being an example, if an area becomes unexpectedly prone to 10,000 or 1,000-year or 100-year floods happening every few years, then the value of those properties can drop over time. They may become uninsurable, and that can have a very distorting effect in terms of the value of those assets. And then that can in turn have knock-on effects on that locality, on the communities, on the businesses in that region. And so that paper was really kind of an empirical analysis of a lot of the discussion that we had heard previously, including with the TCFD and the Financial Stability Board, that has actually driven regulators, including through a network called the Network for Greening of the Financial Sector, to begin to build certain assumptions about what types of climate-related risks need to be assessed in the context of the financial system. And so with that level of interest of regulators and then investors as well, the level of interest of this topic has risen in financial institutions like BMO. So 2 years ago, where these kinds of projects were really the focus of my team, the sustainability team, working maybe strategically with different parts of our organization, now we're having regular discussions with our senior risk executives, our heads of various lines of business. We've had good engagement with the board for a number of years now, but that's even intensifying. So the nature in which these issues are being addressed in the organization, I think, is fundamentally changing into being kind of embedding these ideas into the core processes of our business. And where it'll first happen is around stress testing. So banks, because we have very diversified loan books, our regulators want to ensure that in the event of disruption or market changes, that we won't be unduly exposed to risks that could be disruptive to the financial system more broadly. So they undertake processes like stress testing, and the climate scenario analysis processes that the TCFD talked about have now been picked up by the Bank of Canada, for example. There's been recent discussions from the US Federal Reserve even, and the New York banking regulator, the UK banking regulator, and of course the EU, or the ECB in Europe, to have specific programs of climate-related risk assessment of the financial sector. And that should be seen as just a first start. That is not going to be the end of the story. And the other pattern that I've seen developing this year that's been fascinating to watch has been how that type of work is really laying an infrastructure and a basic foundation for the integration of climate change topics into how banks are thinking about risk and risk management. And then there's also the types of activities that Alex talked about, which really resonated with me around sustainable finance. And we issued our own sustainable finance instrument, a sustainability bond in 2019. We've grown our business significantly in that area. So you're seeing financial markets that are trying to grow and increase capital flows towards green or socially sustainable activities. And I think there's a certain organic nature to that, but there's also a deliberate aspect there too, that, you know, in managing risk and analyzing risk differently, there's also a recognition that opportunities are going to be existing in the green and sustainable areas of business activity that, you know, are really going to be ramped up. And that is actually a deliberate policy strategy that we see out of the EU, for example. And there's also been activity by the Canadian government encouraging sustainable finance as a way to achieve the sustainable development objectives that have been set by policymakers. So there's sort of like a bottom up and a top down angle to this that is affecting all aspects of finance. And we're seeing it just really being embedded into the way that we think about and do business. And then obviously we're connected to companies all throughout the economy. So what it's also done is created opportunities for us to have these discussions with our clients and customers and understand what kinds of topics are material to them that they're seeing. They've asked us for advice in terms of how does the market perceive them. We have a sustainability advisory aspect of our $400 billion sustainable finance commitment that is intended to really work with our clients to help them navigate this global transition and the increasing focus on sustainability. So there's a lot of really exciting things. And I think we're going to have a second segment talking about go forward. And that's where I think this theme of convergence is going to become even more important. And as was also alluded to about this idea of value and the way that disclosure and metrics and information is going to have to be developed by companies and also used by the market, that will really begin to merge more ESG considerations with financial considerations.
That's very, very interesting, Michael. I think it connects with so much that with what we've hearing so far. Something that really triggered my thoughts here, connecting to how Mosaic put forward their governance and their process of reinforcing the ESG management, is this aspect of the tone from the top and discussions at the top of the organization, but at the same time very concerned with the bottom up and how to deal with the operational matters. So that's very important for, I think, thinking from a practitioner's perspective. As we are provoking ourselves, we saw a lot of strategic initiatives throughout our careers that sometimes would just run over the details, and a lot was lost, and strategic value was lost in details. And I think maybe in this convergence, Michael, what we're seeing is that the details, they are not minor. The details are strategic many times, and they are appearing more and more to the extent that we are learning the tangibility of it, the metrics of it. And I think bringing to the board, bringing to the strategic level, these strategic decisions are really transforming how we approach ESG. I think we are raising the stakes, as we can say, with this convergence, right? I think it's a completely different approach that we're taking to this. It's from an issue on the table to really a seat at the table to discuss the ESG matters and to give a strategic direction to it. But speaking of high stakes, we saw that Joe Biden elected his climate czar, and this is no one less than the former state secretary in the Barack Obama administration, John Kerry, and this is just starting point of our next panelist, Bruce Keith, also czar in climate, right, Bruce? And I think it will be very interesting to hear what Bruce will bring forward. We've exchanged with Bruce in other panels regarding climate matters. How much? Well, this is really the topic spearheading a lot of this transformation we are talking about. And I think it would be very interesting to hear your insights, Bruce.
Thank you. Well, bom dia to everybody, and obrigado to the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce for leading a forum on what should be the standard for doing business. So as Rafael mentioned, my background is in climate finance, but that's only sort of one aspect of ESG. I work right now with the IFC. The IFC is the private sector investment arm of the World Bank. A little bit of background first, but our goal is to create and expand capital markets. From the private sector perspective, leveraging what we have to improve these markets and improve standards and move things forward. We have a very large team in Brazil, and we have a large volume of investments and transactions. So not only are we very active, but we're looking to increase that. We're obviously very focused on green, sustainable, impactful investments, but across all industries. I mean, we work from sustainable forest enterprises to all kinds of financial institutions, including funds and even innovation hubs. We work in housing, we do infrastructure, a lot in renewable energy and looking to do more. We work in climate smart agriculture. So Arthur, what you mentioned, I mean, that resonates. I mean, having the right fertilizers and the right ways and not using, the nitrous oxide effects, that's climate smart agriculture. And so existing industries are a big part of what is going to be taking us forward. But we, and we work in resources, and we want to be more active resources. I mean, yes, that's mining, but resources that are critical to the new green economy. Coming out of COVID, how to rebuild, how do we do better? But if we're going to have more electric vehicles, how do we support the resources that feed into that? Things are that way. I mean, sustainable resources for building, for infrastructure. There are ways of looking at it. So we're not just green, we're purposely moving toward green as well. So we lend or invest from low millions to hundreds of millions in all kinds of companies, sectors, and capital markets. We like new innovative ideas that can not only make a difference, and address the pillars of social investment and the SDGs, but that also offer sort of long-term investment opportunities for us and for the markets. And for the most part, IFC has been a standard bearer in ESG, and ESG is at the core of every investment decision that is made. And it is the most significant barrier on whether or not we invest and whether or not we support and whether or not we advise. Essentially, if you do not have a strong ESG program, then why bother? Not just for us, but for you. So let's just go at just some basic elements that most people already touched on ESG that we look at. I mean, we look at the E, environmental. What are the risks and sensitivities? These are the core factors that are, coming out of COVID and rebuilding. The environmental issues. It's not just one's potential impact on environment, but also the fundamental integration or appreciation of the fact that environment and environmental risks are increasing qualitatively and quantitatively. And so they have to be a part of any underwriting and decision-making process. On the social side, it's not just being a good citizen. It's inclusion, it's collaboration, it's engagement. Some of my colleagues on this panel have mentioned that. They mentioned about labor, gender, diversity. It's also land, it's also security. It's health and safety. It's not just health and safety in the communities, but it's the health and safety of our own workers, and if we and the people that are integrated in what we're doing. It's taking care of the human dimension. It's the local involvement. It's impact, but it builds and creates credibility and support, which is critical when crises happen, when problems hit. If you don't already have that credibility and support at the social level, you're not going to get through that crisis or that problem. And then it's governance, and governance is the biggest part. The G is the most important part. It's critical. It ties all of this together. It integrates management systems and business processes. It's strong risk management tools and plans. It's a sustainable business model. I mean, true senior management and board engagement. And these aren't just boilerplate statements or ratings. The execution from the board on down is integral to a solid management plan. And if you don't have it from there, then it's just talk. It's not action. And so all of this, though, as has been mentioned already, this leads to resilience. It leads to mitigating risk. It leads to ability to respond and adapt, to better anticipate and mitigate any upcoming risk. It includes faster recoveries. If you have these processes in place, if you have these values already in action, you have a faster recovery from everything. You can absorb shocks like what people are doing with COVID. You have a better, more consistent long-term performance, and you have competitive advantage. So we actively seek out opportunities where they specifically lay out their ESG profile and operating principles up front. And where relevant, they link to standard bearers like LEED or ISO, the Nature Conservancy, Marine Stewardship Council, whatever it might be. We've got to have those links because that's the standard bearer. But we fully integrate the risks of not addressing ESG in all of our underwriting. And we create mechanisms for institutions to do the same. So we even have a green banking academy. And so part of what Michael Torrance was talking about, we help banks and institutions completely reorient their training, their tools, their metrics, so that a financial institution can understand the risks of ESG, of climate, of what's coming, and embed them like they do any other risk assessment, in all of their underwriting, all of their decision making. So we lend, we invest, we advise, but we focus on the impacts of that deployment, the performance standards of our clients, and the application of IFC performance standards, investment principles, which are actually becoming the norm in investment. When you mention BlackRock, they're applying IFC investment principles already. They formally state that. Over 100 of the largest funds and financial institutions already include those in their decision-making processes, in how they're setting up the new way of investing. So these are driven all by a very robust ESG framework. So I think what we're talking about here, we're all accepting. I think we're all looking for how does this become a more robust application of how we do business along all three factors of ESG. Now I'll leave it back to you guys so we have time for the full discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Bruce. It was very thorough, I think, insight on what the IFC has been doing. I think you've been working very hard on this, and I think one of the key factors that I believe the IFC has been generating is a catalyst effect around these good practices, around gathering this community globally as a driving force for all these aspirations that we are attempting here. And we are short in time, and I think it will be of great value for us to shift and move on to some closing remarks. I think all of you, listening to each other, probably have some final insights in your closing remarks. But I think the challenge we put to you in your closing remarks is really to bring forward what will be your major challenge, your team's major challenge in 2021. In the stepping up of ESG performance, ESG strategy. So we'll need you to be very objective in your replies, in your closing remarks, so that we can try to wrap up our panel in a timely manner. Let me start with Tom, and then we'll move on to the others. So Tom, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you. Our challenges going forward into 2021, I would say the biggest one would be to try and keep up with the momentum and the pace of change. And I would say, again, having been in a company that this is this is all we do, I would say the biggest part is to try and stay a market leader. So on those bond issuances, I think we have done we were the third party opinion about 70% of them in Brazil, but to stay that relevant and to try and be the lead, I think adapting to this merge of financial and ESG or sustainable data together will be key for everyone around the world, as well as, well, that's the main one, and addressing impact, because the world is quickly moving away from a rating or a number towards fact-based, data-based impact, and as was already mentioned, IFC principles have set the groundwork for that long ago, and they are certainly leaders on tracking impact. And I think the rest of us that want to stay up to date in sustainability, whether you're a small company or a large multinational or a big asset management firm, impact, integrating that into your financial decisions and your ESG is going to be a challenge for all of us to stay ahead of the curve and make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Good luck to you in 2021. Keep up the good work. And let me shift to Michael.
Thank you. I think 2021, we're going to see a lot more on this convergence theme. So just yesterday, the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board announced that it's merging with IIRC, the International Integrated Reporting Council. And that is, I think, a pretty significant development. SASB is focused on what they view as being financially relevant sustainability disclosure and metrics. And IIRC has had that as their mandate, the integration of what we would call ESG topics with financial reporting. And SASB's had quite a lot of success. We have had a lot of engagement with investors that have come to us and said, we're now evaluating you with an ESG scorecard of our own, and we're using SASB. I've heard that come up several times. IIRC hadn't taken hold as much, but I think it's a bigger, more international organization. So between the two of them, plus work being done under the auspices of the World Economic Forum around trying to find a unification of disclosure standards, I think we're going to see a real convergence in that field, which will have pretty significant impacts for how we will manage our sustainability disclosure and reporting and monitoring and tracking. And I think it will also begin to influence regulators as well, including securities regulators. So that's certainly something to look out for. And we're going to be doing a lot of work. I think that the focus of it will ultimately, I believe, be around value. And someone else has mentioned that earlier today. There's another kind of convergence idea about value creation and long-term value creation being the pathway for ESG to become relevant financially. And so the more that theme begins to be picked up and there becomes convergence around certain frameworks of measuring, monitoring, and disclosing, I think it will just only amplify sustainability, good practice, and governance expectations of businesses.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. Let me now move on to Arthur.
Thanks, Rafael. Hearing everything that was said, I feel 2021 will have a more robust program even for us. But so good ideas, good insights here that we captured. If I were to answer your question, I'd probably start, given what I've said in my first intervention. I'd start by saying that what we will not do, because we've done a lot over the past couple of years, bottom-up exercise, setting up our ESG committee, identifying our focus areas, having action plans, and so on and so forth. And so it's pretty tempting when you hear everything that was said in terms of incrementing your approach in ESG, bringing more sophisticated concepts, bringing, forming new partnerships, being part of new initiatives. It's a never-ending, in my view, process, if you wish it to be never-ending. So I think that, as Mosaic Fertilizantes in Brazil, we need to go through a process where we freeze the content for a few months, we start governing on our committee, privilege quality over quantity, and make sure that everyone is on board in the organization and delivers on the objectives we have for each focus area. So it's going to be about embedding the ESG concept to all the layers of the organization. It can't stay at leadership level. It needs to be gradually explained and spread into the organization, and people need to feel proud and engaged about what we do. It's about simplifying action plans where we can, and maybe sophisticating in some of the areas that we already identified where we can, and if needed. It's about tracking our performance, and in there I think that there are interesting questions that were raised here in terms of the social return of investment. We have of course metrics and KPIs for each focus areas, but the aggregation of that probably needs to be done in some of the synthetic indexes or good measurements that we could implement. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to govern on what we've done in 2021 and further embed the process in the organization. And but immediately I take the opportunity to say that we're going to be celebrating because Mosaic has just been receiving an award, the Sustainability Award of the Global Rural Media Outlet for 2020 of the Best Ag Company. So I know my team is online here and I'm very proud of this achievement. So that's what we're going to do.
Very good. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Let's move then to Felipe, and then we go Alex, and then we wrap up with Bruce.
I think Arthur speaks well on behalf of Nexa. Yes, we have done a lot, and we need to reach some results. We have broken some ground with some examples in the last few years. For instance, we stopped doing tailings, wet tailings dams, so we quit that. We have a Aripuanã project coming up with 50% of women. The labor is 50% of women from the start, which is breaking some ground at a small level, but it's very relevant to us. We have a plurality programming house. So these examples just show what how you transform concept in actionable plans and results. And I think we're going to keep doing so. Desalination of water, and community relations in other aspects, and developing economics for the communities through several initiatives and several ideas. I think COVID is going to be with us for some time. Somebody said before, 2020 was a suspension year, if you will, which gave us the opportunity to relate quite a lot with the communities around us. I think that will stay, and that will be the new norm for relationships. Starting with COVID, which approximated us and created a very positive way of contributing, I think that will be, the challenge will be to maintain and improve this type of relationship in 2021. At Nexa, we have a program that we have been implementing for 2 years called Jeito Nexa, the Nexa way, if you will. It's a different way of doing things. So we're challenging our own people and engaging our own people in bringing forward new ideas, simple ideas, actionable ideas that we track, initiatives for operational excellence, for growth, but also for ESG. And this is the wave we're in now. We're bringing on ESG ideas or sustainability ideas all over the company from all stakeholders. And this has shown a very positive review. I think for Nexa, it will be a challenge to continue this route, and as we stay to try to define how we're going to be mining in 10 years.
Excellent. Alex?
Okay, Benke, maybe the shortage of time should be interpreted as a metric to indicate that we need an addition too. of this forum. But anyways, I believe that, well, building on what Felipe mentioned on strategy, this is one of our most important challenge. Strategy is really to have a clear strategy on how we are approaching ESG. This is the next step for the organization. Of course, we need a level of change management work as well, because as we are a company that has in its DNA, we are working with renewable power and so on. From a point of view, of course, it's quite positive, but by the other hand, it gives the sense that we do everything. I mean, we are already, and that's not true. I mean, we need to work on transparency. We need to work on clear goals and engage the organization. And the whole organization, all layers, as Arthur mentioned, is our main challenge. Defining a clear strategy that is embedded and known by the whole organization. This is definitely our main challenge for 2021. But I'm glad to see that, and I could say that we are at a point of no return in regards to ESG. And we got momentum, not only talking about our own organization, but also when we see the regulator, when you see investors in Brazil all taking quite relevant initiatives towards an ESG agenda. So I believe that we are at a point of no return in Brazil, and I'm quite optimistic for 2021.
Great, thank you, Alex. Bruce?
Yeah, thank you. Just quickly, coming out of COVID, looking into the next year and years ahead, I mean, we're focused first on resilience. That's our biggest challenge. How do we help our clients and institutions maintain the resilience to what's going on and build, for a better economy going forward? Part of that is helping them retain workers, service providers, community activity. The baseline of any corporate activities is the community around it. And so we are looking for ways to continue supporting that and helping our clients and partners retain those workers and those service providers, because that's what's going to help them grow coming out of this. So we extend or enhanced our credit lines, and we continue to do so. Short-term hits on our returns for the long-term gain of keeping everybody in as much economic activity as possible and ready to come out of this stronger and better, and continue to provide emergency loans if we have to, even when we know they might not be able to be paid back in the short term. How do we support what's happening now? How do we be part of that community and that resilience to move things forward as we come out of COVID? And helping with adjustments in operations. Things have to adjust, not just with COVID, but using this as a lesson for how to create that resilience going forward and those reactive points when things happen. But we are looking, with robust, actionable ESG as the baseline, we look for new opportunities, to grow, to catalyze the recovery, but also continue growing. It's a very long-term perspective. But we are a private market player. We're looking, obviously, to make money and have good returns. Do it from the right ESG baseline, but how do we catalyze that with others? How do we get that going? And therefore demonstrate the value of having ESG principles and standards as your baseline.
Thank you very much, Bruce. We've looking at the Q&As, one topic that has been recurrent in the question was the S in ESG, the social dimension. I think something that maybe permeates across what we've been discussing in terms of trends and what is knocking on our doors is how to approach the social aspect. I think that leads us back to the introductory remarks that Daniela Chimisso brought to us, the shift towards the stakeholders perspective, but beyond that, the rights holders perspective. I think when we speak about social, we will need to shift the perspective of a stakeholder on what is at stake for the company to what is at stake to the rights holder from a business and human rights perspective. I think this is something that we can already see and evidence in the developments that we're having in EU taxonomy, and this is directly impacting what is eligible to sustainable finance, and we are seeing that being also requested in the custody of chain or the chain of custody, sorry, consumers and so on. So I think we are seeing more and more the demand to that. I think thinking of the broad scheme, I think we need to move on from the baselines and metrics to the quality of data that we are using and what generates these metrics, so that these metrics really are effective and result in what we are seeing, be effective really in the ESG impact that we are seeing, be it in reducing negative impacts or in amplifying the positive impact. So I think if we really want to move on to performance, now that we have baselines and have preliminary metrics, we will need more reliable metrics with good information, and that really touches on the bottom up, as we're seeing, so that we can take strategic decisions, well-based strategic decisions. And finally, I think it was Tom who brought forward this aspect of our need for sustaining the momentum. And no doubt we see, it was fantastic to hear Felipe, Alex, Arthur, Bruce, Tom, everyone speaking of the continuation of the efforts and stepping up the strategic approach towards it. So we see the inspiration for and the ambition for the continuous momentum. And I think more and more from what we see, we'll see the filtering and the distinction from a PR exercise and really the core exercise, really applying this to the core of the business, embedding in the business, embedding in the strategy, looking, as Michael was saying, on how to amplify the long-term return of that. So this seriousness in the approach, the seriousness in the content of what we are doing, the impact that we want to generate is what will maybe be the next chapters of serious work in this arena. So I'd like to thank very much these panelists for taking their times to be with us, for the great contribution they brought, very, very thoughtful contributions that they brought forward. Again, thanking the BCC and the whole team, our colleagues at Cescon Barrieu, and then shift back to Carolina to conduct the remaining part of this event. So thank you very much to all of you and to all those who are attending this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafael. Thank you, everyone, for this amazing discussion. We really appreciate you being here today. So for the closing remarks, I would like to invite our friends from Cescon Barrieu, Marques, Flesch, and Frederico Marques. They have a nice announcement to make and to say a few words on behalf of Cescon Barrieu. Please, Marques and Fred, with you.
Thank you, Carolina. I'll just briefly speak a few words and then pass on to Fred. First of all, congratulations for the organization put together this event. I think it's a very, as all the events that you guys organize is very important to get together the two business communities. And I wanted to congratulate all the panelists, specifically mentioning the leadership of Rafael Benke here on the discussions. And I think it was very well organized and moderated. So, I would like to take the opportunity as following the last point that Rafael mentioned on 2021, and mentioned to you guys that we cannot look forward without looking back a little. And when I was hearing you guys, I think that Bruce mentioned on the history of IFC. If I remember, in the late 90s. I think it was the first cycle of some project finance that happened in Brazil, and at that time, IFC was already making, some important contributions to that financing and putting together already and demanding some standards of social care and environmental. At that time, we didn't have this nice concept of ESG, but it was, I think, the first time that we, as full service firm, as lawyers, we had to understand these concepts still separately and had to deal with them and understand. At that time, there were not so many advisors dealing with that. So we saw this concern and this care growing over the last years. I think that over the last 25 years, I think that the last few years saw a lot of crisis here in Brazil, and hopefully we have been moving now. And I think this year is very important for that. We have been moving from crisis management and concerns with things that happened and how they could be avoided to actually, having proper governance, having the proper measures, having the proper risks being considered and taken care of through a proactive way, a way that avoids people having to just have to deal with the issues after they happen. We are very happy to have all of our areas here. We deal with all areas of Brazilian law. We have happy to have been evolving together with our clients from a crisis management process to this more proactive approach, like the ones that IFC already has for more than 2 decades. So with that in mind, we're evolving and trying to get in the right environment and being in the right ecosystem. We have been dealing with a lot of Canadian friends and with the business community there. And as part of our development, we are happy to inform you guys that now one of the first groups that we informed that we are actually going to open an office in Toronto to be even closer to the community there, including because of the opportunities to grow in this area of responsibility, social responsibility, ESG in general. We are that's a new development for 2021. No, it's starting. We're starting the process now, and we'll be happy to be formally there in 2021. But with that being said, we already have been with Frederico Marques, who I will pass on the word now. He's been there as a consultant in Brazilian law for many years now, and he's joining the firm. It's our first office outside Brazil. I think it's the first office of a Brazilian firm in Canada, in Toronto. So I'm happy that we'll be getting even closer there and be able to participate in more opportunities like this with BCCC. So that's the final words, just to congratulate again you all guys and pass on to Frederico.
Thank you, Marcos, and thank you, Rafael. I'm thrilled to be joining Cescon Barrieu after 14 years working as a partner on major Canadian law firms, being the last one, McCarthy Tetro, where I led their Latin America practice for almost 7 years. I'm also honored to announce that I'm joining Cescon Barrieu and will be the head of North America based here in Toronto on this outstanding ESG event. Not only because of what Marco said, that ESG is on the DNA of Cescon Barrieu, but also because ESG is very close to my heart, and I've been working with ESG for quite a few years. Actually, I remember when I moved to Canada, one of the first things that I did was to join the BCCC and to join the PDAC. And at the PDAC, I had the opportunity to participate on their sustainability committee. And back in 2009, we launched a revised E3 Plus, which was a framework for responsible exploration, one of the leading guidelines that is still being used by the industry. And at the BCCC, I was very happy to lead the restructuring of the BCCC and put the chamber pari passu with the governance that our members were implementing and are implementing in terms of governance that they expect from an association of the level of the BCCC. with the presence here in Canada, we will be the first full-service Brazilian law firm with a presence in Toronto and working closely with our clients. I will be, as of January 2021, I will be splitting my time between S4G, a strategic advisory and investment firm, also based here in Toronto, that Bruce Key's brother is one of the co-founding partners. So it's very good to see so many friends and colleagues here. So I'll be spending my time between S4G and Cescon Barrieu, and it'll be a very good experience. And I hope that we can all work together. Going back to our ESG event today, we touch on so many important aspects, but one phrase or one speech that Bruce did and summarized very well the importance of ESG. Why bother if you don't have? Like Alex Monteiro also touched on that importance when he said that there is no turning back on ESG, and it truly, there is no turning back. ESG is here to stay. We, as a lawyer, worked on so many mining financings or joint ventures, M&A, and in the past few years, there is no transaction or significant transaction that ESG is not the core front and center. I remember Felipe saying how transformative the going public transaction that Votorantim did back in 2017 or 17, I believe. And it truly is, and that's the kind of transformation that a platform like Canada can bring to companies everywhere in the world, but especially in Brazil. Once you go public on a Toronto Stock Exchange, in the case of Nexa, they did simultaneously Toronto Stock Exchange and New York Stock Exchange. I was very happy and honored to be part of that transaction, representing the Canadian banks on that investment and the going public transaction. And it gives a different perspective. It raised the bar of the corporation in terms of its governance. So internally, it's a very important transformation, but also externally, how the company is start to deal with different stakeholders and different investors, and the investment community has been demanding strong ESG practice, strong governance, and this is something that Canada can really help Brazilian companies to achieve. So without any other comment, I would, because of the time that we have here, I would like to congratulate again Rafael. Thank you so much for your engagement with the BCCC, your leadership with ESG, and for allowing us at the BCCC to have ESG as our core front and center, one of our pillar events. I would like to leave one suggestion here, Rafael, to you and Daniela. A lot of the speakers touched on a very important subject, which is safety. Safety ties the E, the S, and the G of ESG. And I would like to propose that on another event, maybe in 2021, we explore a little bit about this issue that I think is so important. I think it's the glue on the ESG and how the information flows on the corporations and how we can better deal on that front as well. So congratulations to all the speakers. Congratulations to Rafael, Daniela, Carolina. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Cescon Barrieu, for the trust and for choosing us to be your partner in this big adventure that will be entering the Canadian market. Count on us. We're very excited to work with you 2021. So on behalf of the BCCC, Proactiva, Cescon, thank you all the panelists today for your invaluable contribution to this panel. I'd also like to thank Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce, our annual sponsors, Vale, EGC, Export Development Canada, Landing Mining, Votorantim Cement, Samara Cement, Brookfield, and Cescon Barrieu for the support. Without you, none of this would be possible. We hope the information we shared today was relevant and fruitful for your business. Please keep engaging with the BCC. Follow us on social media. Please sign up to our newsletter. You can find us at www.brascanchamber.org. I hope you all have a great day. Happy American Thanksgiving for Bruce, especially that's San Francisco and is taking time to be here with us today. I hope you all stay safe, stay home, stay in touch. Thank you so much. And don't miss, there's a series of ESG events coming up in February before PDAC. We're already working on our PDAC programming as well for March 2021. That's going to be virtual. So stay in touch and follow us. There's a lot more coming your way. Thank you so much. Happy Thursday, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you.